Tihe Maori ora, ena mana, ena reo, e rā rakaterama, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Good evening and welcome to this, the University of Otago Roheath Trust Award and Carl Smith Medal Lecture, to be presented tonight by Associate Professor Sian Halcrow from the Department of Anatomy. Kia ora. My name is Richard Blakey. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research and Enterprise here at Otago, and that means that I have oversight of the research across our three wonderful main campus locations in Dunedin, Christchurch and Wellington. And one of the most enjoyable duties that I have the privilege to perform every year is this role of presenting the lecturer to you, but also having the unenviable job of chairing the committee that determines who should get this award. So it's my great pleasure to share this celebration of outstanding research achievement with you all, colleagues, members of the local community, and importantly, friends and whānau of our medal recipient. A particular welcome goes to Sian's supporters and family who are here, to your mum and dad, Jeanette and Robert, and two family friends that are here tonight, Maria and Graham Mackay. Tēnā koutou to you. Now, the order of ceremonies is that I will say some words, then I'll invite Sian's Head of Department, Professor Lisa Matasu-Smith, to introduce the lecture. Following this, I have the task of summing up and giving a vote of thanks, after which we will present Sian with the award and the medal, which will be around here somewhere. Yes, I see that they are here. Usually, and we don't tell the awardee, we do have one last stage in the selection process, and that's by acclamation. We'll ask you, the audience, whether or not she deserves it. So it's got to be a good talk then, Sian. And then we'll retire, should that all go well, we will retire to the reception in Seminar Room 5 here on this level for refreshments and fellowship. Now, we have this award. It's the Carl Smith Medal and Roheath Trust Award. And I just want to tell you a little bit about these. Firstly, their purpose. The purpose of these awards, which were established in 2003 and are always awarded together, is very clear. They are to, quote, promote research at the University of Otago and to give recognition to outstanding research performance of early career staff, which is for those who have been at Otago for at least 2 years, but have total research career appointments of less than 10 years. It is research experience and excellence that is the defining factor, not age. This year we had 10 or a dozen nominees who all pretty much met the award criteria with bells on, and after much deliberation we have the brilliant bioarchaeologist from the Department of Anatomy in Sian Halcrow as the recipient. Now, what stood out to the committee about Sian's nomination this year was not just one major internationally significant achievement, but the breadth and depth of her contributions, as I'm sure we'll hear tonight. Sian does a great deal through international collaborations, publishing, graduate student supervision, support for early career research development, gaining extramural funding, and quite a lot of it, thank you very much. And everything she does across this breadth is just quite simply excellent. And it's that breadth of excellence across everything that Sian does that made it really the deciding factor. We don't just decide amongst ourselves, we seek external views, and referees' reports were glowing. And it's the remarks such as, quote, that the remarks helped us decide the case, such as, quote, her virtually matchless record in accessing highly competitive research funding, and her growing list of successful graduate student supervision. And this referee stated that they had first-hand experience of the care and empathy she displays for this important field of academic responsibility. And then from someone who is very senior and distinguished in the field, quote, Dr. Halcrow's publications are impressive in their quality and their sheer volume puts many of us to shame. So it's that range of attributes across all of the areas of research responsibility that did the job for us, so I think you get it. Now, before I ask Sian's HOD to introduce her in the lecture, a little bit about the award and the medal. So why is it the Roheath Trust Award and a Carl Smith Medal? Now, one's for the money and one's for the glory. The Roheath Trust was established in 1964 to support the work of the university, and it was established by Carl Smith, a prominent Dunedin businessman and a member of the University Council. And it was used to endow a $5,000 research support award that bears the Trust's name. At the same time, the university commissioned a medal in Sir Carl's honour as the glory to accompany the money. And actually, a little bit about Carl Smith. We can recognise the contributions that Sir Carl and his wife, Lady Catherine, made over many years after coming to New Zealand from the family estate of Roheath in Birmingham, so therefore the Roheath Trust. The family connection to the university and the award continues, with Sir Carl's daughter Catherine having lived in the region until very recently being a regular attendee at these awards. Now, Sir Carl was a well-known author in addition to his business and community contributions. And in fact, as well as the award and the medal, there is a quirky little gift that we'll have at the end. I think I might have a copy of it here. We give a copy of a book. He was an author of a number of things. This isn't a copy of his volume, Sweet Success, which is a history of the chocolate maker Cadbury Fry Hudson, that he was the chief executive of, but it is a humorous tome called New Zealand from N to Z that's become somewhat of a collector's piece for its interesting insights into 20th century New Zealand culture and society, let's say of a different age. The book is long out of print, but we like to present a copy to the medal recipient every year, and in fact one of the jobs out of my office is to hunt Trade Me and other sources of second-hand books to make sure that we have sufficient numbers of this volume on hand to be able to award one to the recipient. So that's a little bit about why we're here, but mainly we're here to hear Sian give her Carl Smith Medal lecture. So without further ado, I'll hand over to her head of department, Professor Lisa Matasu-Smith, to introduce the speaker to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Tēnā koutou katoa. I do feel particularly pleased to be able to introduce Sian tonight. I first met Sian when she was a first-year student in my Introduction to Biological Anthropology course at the University of Auckland. And when you have several hundred students in your first-year courses, you don't generally remember many of them, but Sian stood out. Not only for her amazing handwriting, which was always great because when you're reading her essays and exam scripts, they were so easy to read, but she was truly the best undergraduate student that I had ever taught. So I was truly dismayed when she didn't turn up for the rest of her degree, when I found out that she came down here to Otago. But then I got to watch her as a biological anthropologist, developing into a true professional. And then I was lucky enough to come down and join her here at the University of Otago, where I got to really work with her as a colleague and see, you know, what an amazing colleague she has grown into. So, yeah. 2007, she received her PhD and is already an associate professor with over 70 publications and 150 plus conference presentations. She truly is a leader in the field of childhood health, infant and childhood health in Southeast Asia, done an amazing amount of field work there, and more recently has extended her work to South America. And, of course, New Zealand and the Pacific. I'm so pleased to see two of her mentors here tonight, Nancy Tallis and Professor Charles Hyam. I was about to call you your son's name, I'm sorry, Charles Hyam. All these Hyams, these professors Hyam, here tonight, because I know that it means a lot to Sian that you're here, and it means a lot to all of us to see her colleagues, her friends, her students. It's a great award, Sian, and we're so proud of you. So I'd also like to welcome her family and Paige, her eldest of her 2 beautiful daughters. Paige is 13, and watching her grow up has been amazing. And now Aaliyah, who's 4, who's not here tonight. So, on top of being an amazing academic and contributor to our field, and all of the blogs and Twitter and everything else you do, your daughters are the biggest priority and the most important. So, no, as a mother, I'm getting all. So I feel kind of like a mum here, talking about my own daughter. But it is my great honor to introduce Sian, Associate Professor Sian Halcrow, my friend, my colleague, and a member of the Department of Anatomy. So, Sian.
Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai, haere mai. Just before I start, you'll notice that I've got a black screen. I am going to be showing some pictures of human skeletal remains, so just a general warning about that. I'd like to thank the academic party, Harleen Hain, Vice-Chancellor, Richard Blakey for giving a really amazing outline of who Sir Carl Smith was, and the significance of his work. Lisa Meadow-Smith, that was a really lovely introduction, and I feel very honoured. And my family who have come down, and my daughter, who's my biggest critic. So she'll be blatantly honest at the end if I don't make sense. Our family friends. I also see some friends up there from Oamaru, Judith and Roger, so it's awesome to see you. And also to Maria and Graham. Mum and Dad, thank you very much for all your support. And I know that there are a lot of my friends who have got young children, and 5:30 is a bad time for them, so I'll just wave to them. I think that's been live streamed potentially, so thank you for your awhi, thank you for your support and love. And also to Lisa Neru for all your wonderful help. I think she's somewhere. Oh, she's at the back. It's been awesome. So it's both a privilege and a challenge to try and explain my work to a general audience. Tonight, what I really want to do is give some case studies on my work that's really looking at major human transitional events, focusing on the development of agriculture and the effects that had on people, but in particular looking at the effects that it had on infants and children, because they're very sensitive barometers of population health. But before I start talking about that, I want to give my acknowledgements. I had to quickly retype these because my PowerPoint decided half an hour before giving this that it wasn't going to play ball. So I'm sorry if anyone's name's spelt wrong or I've missed someone out. I do want to acknowledge from the university all the support that they've given me through UORGs, and also the School of Biomedical Sciences and also the Department of Anatomy. And in particular I want to thank the various HODs from the Department of Anatomy, from when I was a postgrad, Gareth Jones and Helen Nicholson, and most recently Neil Gemmell and Lisa Meadow-Smith have been amazing in terms of mentorship and just helping me in every way, so I really appreciate all your help. Research doesn't happen in a vacuum, and in anthropology we have a lot of people that we usually deal with through multidisciplinary projects, so I've just listed my lab group up there, and I want to say particular thanks to my mentor, colleague, my PhD supervisor Nancy Taylors, and I'll talk a little bit about her later, and my other colleagues, postdocs, PhD students and other students. Our work cannot happen without the amazing support staff that we have. I'm not sure if this is in the same order anymore. No, it's not. So I won't name them all, but I really think that we're very lucky in the Department of Anatomy to have such amazing support staff, and this is what really helps us excel. From the Department of Anatomy, I've had long-standing collaboration with Professor Charles Hyam, who's here tonight, and also Cyril Schaefer. I've co-supervised and done work with him, and I also just wanted to acknowledge some of my old teachers and mentors there. And in particular, I wanted to say thank you to Richard Walter. I'm not sure if he's here, but he's always very kind to me, and he's read multiple Marsden applications for me when he's not on the panel. So I think I owe him a bottle of gin or something. I want to acknowledge our Thai counterparts, in particular Dr. Rachani Tossarat, who's worked with Charles for many years over in Thailand, and her team, including Dang and Al and other family members. And I also want to pay particular acknowledgement to the communities that we work with, and in particular Thai communities, the village of Ban Non Wat, who actually become active within our research, and we couldn't actually do that without them. So someone said it might be nice to talk a little bit about my personal background, and as you can see from the picture with brown and frills, I was born in the late 1970s in Auckland, and my parents had a dream to live the good life, and they decided to travel down to central Southland, and so they carted us down there. That was before my younger sister was born, so I'm one of 5 children. It was always a very busy household. Mum obviously was looking after all us kids, but she was also running the farm, and she was also working outside of the home, and Dad was working full-time as well with his real estate and other businesses. So what they really taught me was a lot of independence and perseverance as well. And having an older brother who used to always thump me, I had to become quite, strong. I think I found school quite easy, which was lucky. I wasn't very challenged, I don't think. And because I was seen as a bright child, I was pushed into doing a lot of mathematics, a lot of science, but I actually really liked social science. And it wasn't until I went to university that I thought, hey, I can actually combine these two. So I can do a BA, BSc, and I loved biology and I loved social science, biological anthropology. So, I did a little bit of human evolution in the 7th form, whatever year that is now, year 13. And started, as Lisa said, my university undergrad at Auckland, and it was amazing. And I particularly remember the paper, I can't remember what it's called now, History of Anthropological Thought, is that right? So, yeah, and that really stayed with me. Lisa was one of the lecturers for that, and it was really just looking at our field and how our research is actually coloured by things that are happening in history, and just really inspired me to keep on going with biological anthropology and archaeology. I saw the light and came down to Otago, no offence. No, I actually came down, to be honest, to Otago to be closer to my parents. And I did have to do a bit of work. I worked full-time and studied full-time at the same time to try and support myself. And it was in the 2nd year that I was down here that I did Biological Anthropology 301, which at the time was called Anthropology 307. And it just really, Hallie Buckley coordinated that. Nancy taught into that, Nancy Taylor's taught into that, and also Kate DeMette, who are now all my colleagues. And it was really life-changing. I mean, I loved the theory that they were teaching, but actually going into the labs, going into the amazing anatomy museum that we've got and working with material was invaluable. So it was really like a change, life changer for me in terms of my research. So I was a very shy student. And I remember walking into the Department of Anatomy at the end of my third year, and I wanted to go up and see Nancy and ask her about her work in Thailand. And I remember coming up, and Annette was the secretary, and I said to her, "Hello, I'm here to see Nancy Tails." And she said, "What are you talking about? Nancy Taylor's?" And I thought, "Oh no, this is a bad start." But I went up and talked to Nancy, and now know how to pronounce her name. And she very kindly took me under her wing, and she took me through my fourth year dissertation, working on some skeletal remains that were at the time held in the anatomy department from Thailand. And at the end of that year, she offered an amazing experience for me to go over and help excavate at a Thai site that was co-directed by Charles Hyam and Rachani Tosarat. And since that time, I've had other opportunities working at the site. The site's called Ban Non Wat, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. During my PhD, the first best thing that's ever happened to me, my first child came along. This is Paige sleeping on a pile of chapters for my thesis. She was in my office and she must have been tired. She usually just held her to go to sleep, but she put down a duvet and fell asleep on that, so I thought that was a good photo to take. And this is a photo of me graduating from my PhD, and Nancy there, and little Paige, who I think had just turned 2. Sorry, Nancy, I know you don't like that photo, but I think it's lovely. So it has been a hard road, I suppose, for me in a way. It is very hard being an academic and being a parent, and it is particularly hard being an anthropologist and all the travel that we do. So I just wanted to thank Paige for putting up with a sometimes absent-minded mother, not totally engaged with everything you do, but I hope you've also had some amazing opportunities, and I hope to give you many more opportunities as well, coming around the world with me. And I think sometimes it's easy to forget, we become so focused on the papers and the outputs that we forget the human connections. And through my work, especially in northeast Thailand, we've been working with the same group of people. On the left there in the peach, that's Dr. Rachani Tosarat, and you can see beside me, that's Nancy Taylor's and other dear Thai friends who all work on the excavation. And they're lifelong friends, and I could say that they're basically part of my family, so it's an amazing place to work, and it's been life-changing. So that's the hard part over, and I didn't cry. That's good. So I just wanted to now talk a little bit about the background of what our research group does, and also give some case studies of my work that looks at assessing the agricultural transition in the past. So what is bioarchaeology? Bioarchaeology, by its very simplest definition, is the study of human remains from archaeological sites. But it's not just looking at their skeletons as such, it's trying to interpret what's going on in terms of stress and adaptation within within the environment. So looking at the natural and social environment and how that interacts with the human biology. And it's the only direct way in which we can actually look at people from the past, is actually looking at their skeletal remains. But where are all the children? they're definitely represented in a lot of skeletal samples, but up to about 2 decades ago, they weren't looked at very much. And I think it's because, in part, that biological anthropology used to be very interested on looking at physical characteristics of people. So they're interested in looking at the cranial morphology and how different groups may relate or not relate to others. So a lot of measurements of skulls and that type of thing. We've moved on since then, and we're more interested in looking at human adaptation and plasticity. But because children are actively growing, their skulls aren't necessarily complete when you get them from excavation. So they're no use to be able to measure things like that. So that's part of the reason why they hadn't been looked at very much in the past. But over the last 2 decades, there has been a flurry of research in the area, which is great. And bioarchaeologists now acknowledge that infants and children are the most sensitive kind of measures of health in a population. They are actively growing physically, and they also have a developing immune system. So they're very sensitive barometers of population stress. And my research group is also particularly interested in looking at the nexus or the relationship between mother and the infant, or the maternal fetus nexus. And this is really important because during pregnancy, the mother and the child are very susceptible to disease and also the exacerbation of existing disease. For example, an infection with Plasmodium vivax or Plasmodium falciparum during pregnancy can lead to chronic anemia, placental malarial infection, reducing the birth weight and a risk of neonatal death and also death of the mother. And it's well known as well that disruptions of physiological stress during development, especially in utero, can have lifelong implications for health. So how do we actually look at stress and health in individuals in the past? This is just a picture that I've actually pulled off my colleague's paper, which I thought was very good, looking at different stress indicators. So you'll see the top left there, you've got arrows, and they're pointing to small pits, so hopefully you can see that. And they're linear pits. What they actually represent is part of the tooth that hasn't formed properly during development. So it implies that this individual has actually gone under some kind of stress, so some kind of physiological stress. We don't know what that stress is. It could be malnutrition, it could be some kind of infection. So we call these non-specific stress indicators. We don't know the etiology necessarily. And you can see underneath that, what that is a radiograph of the distal tibia, so the bottom of your shin bone. And you can see those white lines, hopefully. Those lines are lines of arrested development. And they form after resumption of growth, after you've had some kind of stunting occurring. That's another way that we can look at stress. And this picture is of a child, I think 7 years of age, and it's after being excavated. And what Johnny found is that while this individual has a dental age of about 7, it was very, very stunted for age. So this is another way in which we can look at stress in the past. And we can also look at other skeletal pathology, which may give us indications of specific types of disease, but most of the stuff that we look at is actually non-specific. So what are my research questions and why is this important? I'm interested in looking at, in large part, the effects on human biology of major transitions in the past. And one of those transitions was, as I said before, the development and intensification of agriculture. And this has impacts on the whole society, including changes in health, changes in fertility, and also changes in terms of social complexity and technological development. So the general bioarchaeological model of health change with agricultural development persists that there will be a deterioration of health with the advent of agriculture. So it may sound a little bit different from what you thought. Agriculture is often seen by some people to be something that was good, but in fact it's actually caused a lot of major problems for society today. When you have the development of agriculture, you often have communities who are once potentially moving around and hunting, staying in one spot. So they become sedentary, you have more people living together, you've got sometimes a surplus of food, fertility may change, you have bigger societies, more unsanitary living conditions, and as well, in some places with the development of agriculture, they become more reliant on just a single food source. So they don't have much dietary diversity, so therefore they can have issues of malnutrition. So it's not all good. But this model has been developed really in the US and in Europe and in the Middle East. But research that's been done by Nancy Taylor and other colleagues has found that in Southeast Asia there's no real clear change in health with agricultural development. A problem that we do have is that we don't have a lot of agricultural societies to compare them to. So we're usually just comparing post-agricultural societies and ones with increasing intensification of agriculture. And the hypothesis is, or the reasoning that's given for this instance, or what's happening in Southeast Asia, is that there is a retention of a very broad spectrum subsistence base. So just as today, the rice agriculturalists in the northeast are reliant on rice, they also they fish, they hunt, they have a lot of wild plant resources, fruits. So that it's a different kind of scenario to say what happened in the US and Europe. So why should we care about the development of agriculture and the start of it and the implications that it has on human health? It continues to have implications on humans today. Nearly half of the world, mainly children and women, live in poverty with little access to healthcare, they have poor nutrition, and they live in crowded, unsanitary living conditions. And you could argue that this actually has its ultimate beginnings with the adoption of agriculture, although I acknowledge that some of the issues that we have with poverty is actually linked to modern social, political, economic relationships as well. So most of my work is actually done in Thailand, in a very tropical environment. I also do work in other places in Southeast Asia. I've been lucky enough to work in Cambodia, and Laos, and Indonesia. I've been parts of a project, in a couple of projects in New Zealand, and starting some work in China. But I want to talk today about work in Thailand, just giving some case examples, and also work that I do in a very different place in the world. And this is in northern Chile, which is in the area of Arica, which is the driest hot desert in the world. And I think it's really useful to look at different places to answer this question, because we can look at the range of human responses in these diverse environments. So for my PhD, thanks to Charles and his team of archaeologists, we were building up a repository of human skeletal remains from different parts of Thailand and from different time periods. So I can look at trying to assess the impact of the agricultural transition on infants and children. So what I did, hopefully you can see this, is chose sites that range from the Neolithic, so from about 4,000 years ago, and spanned right through to the Iron Age, where you have the intensification of agriculture and major technological and social change. So I used a number of different methods to try and look at health change and stress, and I found that there was no clear deterioration in health over time, but I did find that there was an increase in non-specific stress indicators in the Iron Age, which was interesting. And I also found an increase in the number of infants dying, so potentially a demographic change was happening there. But it was difficult because, as I just showed you before on this map, the sites were from southeast right up to the northeast. So I couldn't necessarily control for different environments, okay, which could have been having implications on the results. And we also, up till that time, had quite poor preservation from the Iron Age sites. So I couldn't fully look at lots of the skeletal pathology that I would have liked to have looked at for that. But luckily, Charles and Rachani and Nancy and others have had projects that in the last 2 decades that are centred around the Upper Moon River Valley. The site of Ban Non Wat has a very long occupational sequence, and it's got over 700 individuals, and it spans from the Neolithic to the Iron Age. So it's a really good site to try and look at these health differences over time without having to control for environmental differences. Non Ban Jack is the most recently excavated site in that region by our group, and this is really an important site because it's a very late Iron Age site. It's got a good sample size, and it has amazing preservation, which is very, very odd for the Iron Age. And Charles has also excavated Ban Lam Cow earlier, which has over 100 individuals, which is a Bronze Age, and Nonu Lok, which is in the Iron Age. So now I just want to turn to some of the work that I've been doing, looking at how we can use infant and child mortality to tell something about population growth, fertility and demography from the Upper Moon River Valley. I don't know how to make this, I can't see this display properly, so I'm just going to have to... Paleodemographic analysis is very important for understanding population growth and also looking at health and maternal stress. Typically, though, individuals less than 5 years of age are excluded from these analyses, despite the fact that a lot of sites actually have very high representation of infants and children. And research has shown that populations with high fertility actually have very high rates of infant and fetal mortality. So it could be argued that they are very sensitive measures for demographic change. So if we look at these sites, so on the left you've got the Bronze Age sites, and on the right you've got the Iron Age sites, so we're looking chronologically. You can see the grey bar, that's the number of individuals under 1. You can see that there's a significant increase in the Iron Age with mortality. And you're also, interestingly, the late Iron Age site, Non Ban Jack, right on the right-hand side, has got a high number of fetal deaths, as well as the late period of which is just right beside that. So does that mean that there was a paleo-demographic change in the Iron Age? Was something happening in terms of fertility, or something happening in terms of poor health, where these infants and children were dying, or both? They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. So how can we try and understand what's happening in the Iron Age? Interestingly, at the same time as these demographic changes were happening, and changes also in stress indicators, there was faltering of the annual monsoon in the northeast. And archaeologists argue that this gave an impetus for management of water, as evidenced by the development of these moats. So you can see these, this is an archaeological site, and these are actually moats for water storage around here. At the same time, we've got evidence for deforestation through pollen analysis and also other microfossil analysis. There would have been a change in with the development of moats, there would have been a lot of standing water, and that's a great habitat for vectors of disease, including snails and fish, helmnths, protozoa, and it's a preferred habitat for mosquitoes, including those that carry malaria. So we would expect to see, if this was the case, a high burden of disease on infants, causing infant mortality and very young child mortality, and that's what we seem to see. We've also got a lot of archaeological information about the intensification of wet rice agriculture. We've got archaeological tools. That one in the middle is a ploughshare, and lots of sickles found at sites in the Iron Age. And we've also got pollen analysis of rice field weed species, which is very interesting. We also see major socioeconomic changes during the Iron Age. Populations increase in size, as well as the density of the sites along the landscape. And Charles Hyam has estimated that the settlement sizes could be between 1,000 and 2,000 people. We've got increasing trade links that are seen through increasing number and variety of grave goods, for example. And this would have brought not just new trade goods, but potentially novel diseases to the area with increased trade. And archaeologists argue that from the archaeological evidence, there was probably a fixed social hierarchy, which could have meant that there was differential access to resources and also division of labour, which would have had consequences on health. So what are we seeing? Are we seeing that there was actually an agricultural transition later in the Iron Age? Perhaps. I think the bioarchaeological and archaeological evidence actually points to a health shift during that time when we look at the infant and child data. And this really supports the need for regional assessment of these changes. So moving on to a very different part of the world, the Atacama Desert. As you can see from the map, this is the region that we're interested in, right up here in Arica. And this is very close to the Peruvian border. And as I said before, this is in the desert. It's the driest hot desert in the world. And it's famous because it's got the first evidence for artificial mummification of people. And this predates the Egyptian mummification by almost 3 millennia. So it's quite significant. The reason that I was very interested in doing work here, my colleague Bernardo Ariaza and Vivian Standen invited me to do a project with them, was because it had a very long chronological sequence that were very well dated from the Archaic period, dating back to about 11,000 years ago, through to the early formative, when you have supplementary horticulturalism, and then the late formative period from about 2,500 years ago, where you have the introduction of cultivars. And we hypothesised that the effects of health change would have been heightened in this area with agriculture because it's such a marginal environment. So what we did is we, for our Marsden grant, developed a research project that looked at lots of different methods, looking at stress, looking at paleopathology of disease, and also looking at different ways of assessing diet through stable isotopic analysis, chemical analysis, and also dental wear. So I just want to now show two very short case studies. One of them has been published by Dr. Annie Snoddy. She did her PhD on this Marsden project. Her PhD aim was to look at the potential impact of changing subsistence economy on the prevalence of metabolic and infectious disease, and if there was a relationship between those. And she had a very good sample size there for her PhD, and she also looked at some other smaller sites that weren't actually included in her PhD in the end, but she's published on them. And I just want to talk about the case series, which is really interesting, from the site called Kiani 7. Now this is a really interesting site because it actually spans from the Archaic period, so the Archaic hunter-gatherer period, through to the time when you've got the adoption of domesticates on the coast. So there were 12 individuals at the site, 8 of them were adults and 4 of them were infants, and they're all perinates, so they all died around the time of birth, around the time of newborn. All, as you can see from the photos, very well preserved. The skeletal lesions were found on all the newborns, which were suggestive of chronic hemorrhage and poor bone matrix formation. That's my typo. So I just wanted to show you what we look at in terms of paleopathology, and this is all Annie's wonderful work. I don't take credit for this at all. This is part of your cranium, so it's a parietal fragment, so it's up here of a newborn, and you can see here compared to this normal example, it's very, very thin. You can't really see that it's very thin, but it's almost paper thin, okay? And it's actually got a lot of new bone growth as well. So that's abnormal. Annie thought that this could be some kind of mineralisation disorder, and this could be from metabolic disease, including scurvy. She also found abnormal new bone formation and porosity at vascular sites, so where blood vessels are, and also enthesial sites. So enthesial sites are where you have muscle attachments, essentially. And this capillary proliferation and the hypervascular, this is from a hypervascular response to low-grade hemorrhage, probably, this new bone growth here. She also found new bone growth on the inside of some of the crania, and you can see here you've got this proliferation of, you've got capillary impressions here, and this is probably a response to low-grade hemorrhage as well, which is also maybe indicative of scurvy. Interestingly, she found a mother-baby pair within a burial, which is really interesting, and the female, or a supposed mother-baby pair, the female in this burial actually had multiple cranial lesions, which are probably suggestive or even diagnostic of scurvy. So how do we interpret this within the bioarchaeological context? It's interesting because these are newborns with evidence for vitamin C deficiency, and that's not what we find in the clinical literature. It's very rarely do people talk about this in the clinical literature. So that's really interesting in itself, and it's probably because the evidence of it is so subtle, it wouldn't necessarily come up in radiographs and stuff like that. but it also says something about the shift in agriculture at that time. Probably a shift in resource use, so going from high vitamin C wild resources to low vitamin C processed cultivars potentially. And Annie also made a really important point that the subperiosteal new bone that we're seeing can only form if the vitamin C is restored before death. So there was probably a famine period, so you'd have vitamin C deficiency and then you'd come out of that because you can't have these lesions forming until after the vitamin C has actually come back into your body. So she hypothesised that it could have been some kind of famine period through the El Nino Southern Oscillation event, potentially. So it's really, really interesting. And it also means, I think, that the fetal period is a really good indicator of micronutrient deficiency. And children and pregnant women, lactating women, have very high metabolic requirements for vitamin C. So that makes a lot of sense. They're actually very good indicators of that. I think I'm on time. So another way that we can look at the maternal-infant nexus and looking at agricultural transition is to look at feeding of infants and also weaning of infants. And the weaning time is really important because it's fundamentally linked to female fertility and potentially to population growth. We can look at weaning through the analysis of carbon and nitrogen isotope ratios. So this work has been done by, sorry, your name's come off here, Dr. Charlotte King. She had a Rutherford postdoc and was also working on our Marsden, and she's done some great work looking at isotopic evidence for weaning and diet within the Atacama. I won't go into too much information about what isotopes are, but essentially what happens is when you breastfeed, you have a trophic level shift, okay? So your isotope values will be higher than what you're eating, okay? So you're actually consuming milk that's produced from the mother, so you're consuming something that's made from their tissues, okay? So you're going to have a higher nitrogen isotope level than the female mean. Okay, so this is just a schematic of what we would expect to see with a weaning curve. And with agriculture, what we would expect is that with more carbohydrate-rich foods, better weaning foods, that you may have a earlier weaning time, okay? Charlotte's done some amazing work applying new techniques for sampling for isotopes across the time of the tooth development. So she can actually trace through the life history of the individuals at specific times when the tooth was actually forming. It was very, very cool. However, when we look over time from the archaic period right through to a late prehistory and into the historic period, what we find is that there's no systematic temporal changes to weaning behaviour. And we also find that the weaning curves aren't actually as we expect at all. Okay, this isn't working. It's a bit funny. There we go. So this is an example of a weaning curve, so-called weaning curve. And what you see here, the red is actually the nitrogen. So this is actually 28 parts per mil here, and it drops down over 8 parts per mil. So what Charlotte has hypothesised is that this probably means that there was very, very high infant fetal stress, and this drop in nitrogen is coming down, so there's less stress after birth potentially. This is where my slides go funny, okay. And this as well, this is showing big spikes in nitrogen and big troughs and spikes again. And that's also been interpreted as a result potentially in stress rather than any dietary change, because the changes are too big to be a trophic level shift. Okay. So to conclude, using an approach that looks at diverse regions or areas in the world, we can find that patterns of the health change with agricultural transition are regionally specific, and they're much more nuanced than the model predicts. Recent advances in methods for looking at infants, including them in demography, analysis and paleopathology, and isotope sampling, etc., shows the intricate relationship between the mother and child and really illuminates their stories of stress. Thank you very much.
But well done, Sian. It's my an enviable task to wrap up and give a vote of thanks. I think what we've seen here is a wonderful example of the strength and breadth of research at the university, and that ability for us to develop strong young researchers into future research leaders, and then see them, as you did beautifully tonight, Sian, develop their next generation of research leaders. And I want to express my appreciation for you recognising specifically your colleagues, in particular your young colleagues, that you're helping to develop along the way. One thing that struck me coming to the University of Otago now 7 years ago into an area that has a comprehensive coverage, in particular into health sciences from an engineering background, is that ability to connect basic studies across a wide range of areas into real problems of significance to us here today. And I think what you've shown us is that in looking at the archaeological record, you can identify issues that we might think about as we transition our agriculture, our social structures, and as we think about how we might, as societies and individuals, respond to things like climate change and disease incursions. You, through your work and the work of your colleagues, have given us some insights into those kinds of things, through working in some amazing places that I'm very jealous about, that I don't think I could get the excuse to work in. Just as a final remark, what you've also shown to me is the strength of work in a particular area at the University of Otago in using infants and children as sensitive barometers. And it's actually quite good that we've got our Vice-Chancellor here tonight, because we've got huge strengths in child and youth health and well-being at the University of Otago. So again, acknowledging Harleen for an outstanding world-leading work in child psychology, focusing on very, very young children. What you've shown us, Sian, is that by focusing on some very, very old children, some really old children, that we can also get and gain understandings of, and what I've learned tonight that I didn't know, not just those health and physiological issues, but some of those social issues about how that infant and her mother, his or her mother, might interact through inference of things that are deeply buried in the bioarchaeological record. So I think you'll all agree with me that Sian has passed the test and has given an outstanding presentation tonight. So before I give the award, I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking her once again for her presentation. I would also, before we give the award, like to thank Lisa and the team from events. We've got a new events team tonight in preparing for tonight, and thank you, and please pass on my thanks to the team. And it's now my great pleasure to award Sian the 2018 Carl Smith Medal. This way?
I hope you're all smiling.
You take this is yours now.
Okay.
And Of course, the most important thing is the book from N to Z, something to
Thank you so
read
much.
read to your kids and laugh.
Yeah, okay.
And
She'll read it.
Lisa has initiated a new surprise gift for you
Oh,
tonight
thank
as well,
you.
so please
That's
accept
awesome.
this on our behalf.
Thank you so much.
So thank you once again, Sian, and now I'll invite you all, perhaps after another round of applause for appreciation, to join us all for refreshments in Seminar Room 5. Thank you all very much.